Nkiru from Abuja. Nkiru Okafor had always been known as the dependable one, the child who grew into the woman everyone relied on without hesitation. From a very young age, responsibility seemed to settle on her shoulders naturally, as if it had chosen her long before she understood what the word meant. While other children explored recklessly, Nkiru moved carefully, observing before acting, listening before speaking. She was never pushed into maturity. She stepped into it quietly, willingly. She was not the loudest voice in the room, nor the one who demanded attention. Yet her presence was reassuring. When she spoke, people listened, not because she was forceful, but because her words were measured and sincere. Elders noticed her early on. They trusted her instincts, her honesty, and her discipline. Among her peers, she earned respect not through dominance, but through consistency. If Nkiru gave her word, it was as good as done. Instructions, once given to her, were carried out with care and precision. She did not believe in shortcuts. Every task, no matter how small, deserved full attention. She understood that carelessness often led to regret, and regret was something she tried her best to avoid. To her, excellence was not about perfection but about intention, doing things the right way, even when no one was watching. Within her household, Nkiru's name carried weight. If money needed to be kept safe, it was placed in her hands. If a younger sibling struggled with school or behavior, she was asked to intervene. Relatives trusted her with secrets, with plans, with responsibilities others might mishandle. She accepted these roles without complaint. Responsibility, to Nkiru, was not a burden, it was a reflection of character. Being dependable meant being worthy of trust, and trust was sacred. Abuja, her home city, shaped her further. The capital moved with purpose, busy, structured, demanding awareness. It was a city of schedules, institutions, and unspoken rules. Nkiru learned early that surviving Abuja required balance, knowing when to move quickly and when to pause, when to speak and when to remain silent. The city sharpened her ability to stay composed amid pressure. She learned to observe crowds, read intentions, and anticipate consequences. Her days were organized with intention. She planned ahead, arrived early, and avoided unnecessary risks. Chaos unsettled her, and confusion made her anxious. Where others might thrive in unpredictability, Nkiru found comfort in order. Friends sometimes teased her for being overly cautious, but she preferred the word thoughtful. She understood that every decision, no matter how trivial, carried weight. To act without reflection was, in her eyes, irresponsible. This philosophy extended into her relationships. Nkiru watched friendships form and collapse, watched people hurt one another through carelessness or selfish desire. She believed connection required patience and mutual respect. She did not rush intimacy, nor did she seek validation through attention. She valued emotional safety above excitement. While others chased fleeting passion, she waited for something steady, something that could endure time and pressure. Love, to Nkiru, was not loud or rushed. It was quiet, deliberate, and built on understanding. She believed genuine affection did not need to be forced or announced. If it was real, it would grow naturally. She refused to be pressured by timelines or expectations imposed by society. She trusted that what was meant for her would arrive when she was ready and when it was right. By the time December arrived, Nkiru Okafor felt confident in her judgment. Years of careful choices had reinforced her belief in discipline and patience. She trusted her instincts because they had rarely failed her. She moved through life with intention, aware of consequences and mindful of others. Yet, despite her preparation, life had a way of challenging even the most carefully constructed beliefs. As she packed her bags to travel from Abuja to Lagos for the Christmas holidays, a quiet anticipation filled her chest. Lagos promised warmth, laughter, family gatherings, and the familiar chaos of celebration. She imagined shared meals, late-night conversations, and the comfort of loved ones. She did not foresee how a single moment during the season would test her understanding of responsibility or force her to question how well she truly understood people. The journey ahead felt routine, but something lingered beneath the surface, an unease she could not quite name. She dismissed it as nerves or excitement. After all, she had planned everything carefully, as she always did. Still, life had its own plans. Her sense of duty, her patience, and her carefully structured worldview were about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. What awaited her was not chaos, but choice, and the realization that even the most responsible heart can be caught unprepared when human emotions collide with expectation. An online beginning. 2 months before Christmas, Nkiru Okafor met him online. There was no dramatic spark, no instant certainty that this moment would matter. A simple message appeared on her screen, polite, thoughtful, unassuming. She replied out of courtesy, expecting nothing more than a brief exchange that would soon fade into silence, as many others had before. But this conversation did not disappear. At first, their messages were light and cautious. They spoke about ordinary things, work, the weather, small frustrations that barely registered as important. Nkiru remained reserved, careful not to reveal too much too quickly. She had learned, through observation and experience, that emotional openness required patience. Still, something about his responses held her attention. He asked questions that showed curiosity rather than obligation. He remembered details she mentioned in passing. He did not rush the conversation or push for intimacy. Days passed, then weeks, and their communication grew steadier. What began as casual exchanges slowly turned into long conversations that stretched late into the night. Topics shifted naturally, from daily routines to ambitions, from childhood memories to quiet fears about the future. Nkiru found herself opening up in ways she usually reserved for people she trusted deeply. To her surprise, it felt easy. He listened in a way that made her feel seen. When she spoke about minor frustrations at work or responsibilities that weighed heavily on her, he did not dismiss them or attempt to solve them quickly. Instead, he acknowledged her feelings, offering reassurance and understanding. There was no pressure to perform, no expectation to impress. She could speak freely, without fear of being misunderstood. In a digital world where attention was often inconsistent, his steadiness stood out. His messages arrived when he said they would. His calls were never rushed. Even on busy days, he found time to check in, asking how she was doing and genuinely wanting to know the answer. That consistency gave Nkiru a sense of security she had not expected to find online. Soon, phone calls replaced most of their messages. What began as short conversations turned into hours-long discussions. They laughed easily, shared stories about family and upbringing, and spoke about their goals with quiet honesty. The sound of his voice became familiar, comforting. She noticed how she smiled during their calls, how her evenings felt lighter afterward. Without ever making a formal declaration, they both came to understand that they were more than friends. The shift was subtle, no dramatic confession, no sudden change in tone. It simply became clear that they cared for each other. The relationship unfolded naturally, built on mutual respect and growing trust. Nkiru appreciated that there was no pressure, no demand to define things too quickly. It aligned with how she approached life, carefully, deliberately, and with intention. Still, there was one undeniable absence. They had not met in person. Their connection existed within the safe distance of screens and voices. While the emotional bond felt real, Nkiru was aware of the limitations. She imagined what it would be like to see him face to face, to observe his expressions, his gestures, the way he moved through space. Would the ease they shared through calls translate into real life? Would the comfort remain, or would it shift into something unfamiliar? The thought both excited and unsettled her. She replayed the imagined meeting in her mind more than once, envisioning the first greeting, the first shared smile, the first conversation without a screen between them. She wanted the moment to feel right, unforced, true to the connection they had built. As Christmas approached, the anticipation grew stronger. The season carried expectations of togetherness, warmth, and love. For Nkiru, it also carried uncertainty. She was stepping into unfamiliar territory, guided by trust but aware of risk. The balance between excitement and caution stayed with her, quiet but persistent. She did not yet know how that first meeting would unfold. She only knew that the night she had imagined so carefully would soon arrive, and that reality, unlike imagination, could not be controlled. A kind man from afar. What stood out most in Nkiru Okafor about him was his kindness, a quality that had become increasingly rare in her experience. It was not performative or exaggerated, not something he displayed for praise or recognition. It revealed itself in subtle ways, in how he listened, in how he paused before responding, and in how he acknowledged her feelings without minimizing them. He did not simply hear her words. He understood the emotions beneath them. Whenever she spoke about the small struggles of her daily life, pressures at work, academic responsibilities, or quiet family concerns, he responded with patience and empathy. He did not rush to offer solutions or dismiss her worries as insignificant. Instead, he allowed her space to express herself fully. There was no judgment in his tone, no teasing that crossed into insensitivity, no impatience when she needed time to think through her thoughts. Each conversation left her feeling lighter, as though sharing her burdens made them easier to carry. What reassured her even more was the absence of pressure. He never pushed her to make commitments before she was ready. He never demanded constant communication or sought to define the relationship on his own terms. Kiru, who valued autonomy and emotional safety, found comfort in this. He respected her boundaries instinctively, without needing them to be explained repeatedly. Even when their schedules clashed or days passed with fewer conversations, he remained steady and understanding. Over time, their interactions grew deeper. Messages became more thoughtful. Phone calls became a regular part of her routine, often stretching long into the night. They talked about everything and nothing, about childhood memories, family expectations, personal values, and the fears they rarely admitted aloud. There were moments of laughter that felt effortless and silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward. And Kira noticed how easily she could be herself with him, without guarding every word. She found comfort in the rhythm they created together. There was no rush, no dramatic highs and lows, just a gradual unfolding of friendship layered with affection. It felt honest and grounded, built on consistency rather than excitement alone. For someone like Nkiru, who believed deeply in patience and careful choices, this mattered more than grand gestures. Eventually, without a formal conversation or declaration, they both understood that they were dating. The realization came quietly, shaped by habit and care rather than sudden emotion. It felt natural, almost inevitable. There was reassurance in knowing that someone valued her not for what she offered, but for who she was. For the first time in a long while, she felt emotionally safe. Yet, despite the depth of their connection, something remained missing. They had never met in person. Their relationship existed within the safe boundaries of screens and voices. While the emotional intimacy felt real, Nkiru was aware of the distance that separated them. She wondered how his presence would feel, whether his warmth would translate beyond words, whether the comfort she felt during phone calls would remain when they stood face to face. The thought of meeting him stirred excitement, but also uncertainty. She imagined the moment countless times: the first greeting, the exchange of smiles, the sound of his voice without a phone between them. She wondered how she would feel standing beside him, whether she would recognize the same calm she had come to trust. These thoughts filled her quiet moments, blending anticipation with cautious reflection. As Christmas approached, the tension between excitement and uncertainty grew stronger. The season carried expectations of joy, connection, and togetherness. For Nkiru, it also carried risk. She trusted the foundation they had built, yet she understood that reality could challenge even the strongest assumptions. She did not know how that first meeting would unfold. She only knew that it would test her beliefs about patience, responsibility, and trust. The night she had imagined so carefully was approaching, and with it, the possibility that everything she thought she understood would be reshaped in ways she could not yet foresee. Journey to Lagos. As the Christmas season drew closer, Nkiru Okafor packed her belongings with careful precision, folding each item neatly and checking her list more than once. She was accustomed to preparing thoroughly, and this trip was no exception. Yet this time, her careful planning carried an undercurrent of emotion she could not ignore. This journey from Abuja to Lagos was not just a return home for the holidays. It marked the approach of something deeply personal. She was traveling with the quiet expectation of meeting someone who had grown important to her, someone she trusted in ways she rarely allowed. The route from Abuja was familiar, one she had traveled countless times over the years. Still, it felt different now. As the city's structured skyline faded behind her, replaced by open highways and clusters of roadside towns, her thoughts drifted inward. The movement of the vehicle mirrored her own transition, from the controlled rhythm of her Abuja life into the emotional uncertainty waiting for her in Lagos. Along the road, scenes passed in a blur, Vendors waving bags of snacks at stopped vehicles, motorcycles weaving through traffic, distant hills dissolving into flat stretches of land. The steady hum of the journey gave her space to think. She replayed moments from the past 2 months, the easy laughter during late-night calls, the reassurance in his voice, the gentle way he asked about her day. Each memory reinforced the bond they had built, a connection that now felt real enough to shape her expectations. Yet excitement shared space with nervous reflection. Words and voices, she reminded herself, were not the same as presence. She wondered how he would look standing in front of her, whether the comfort she felt over the phone would carry into reality. She questioned her own readiness, aware that first meetings often revealed truths that distance could hide. Despite her trust, uncertainty lingered, subtle but persistent. By the time the vehicle entered Lagos, daylight was beginning to soften into evening. The city announced itself loudly, as it always did. Traffic thickened, horns blared, and the air buzzed with energy. Neon lights flickered to life as dusk settled, reflecting off wet roads and shop windows. Lagos was alive, chaotic, familiar. It wrapped around her senses, grounding her in a place she knew deeply. Stepping into her family home, the emotional shift was immediate. The house was already full of noise and movement. Younger siblings, cousins, a niece, and a nephew filled the rooms with laughter and questions. With many of the older relatives away, responsibility naturally fell to Nkiru. At once, she was the organizer, the authority, the calm presence everyone turned to. 23 younger family members depended on her guidance, and she stepped into the role instinctively. She moved through the house with efficiency, ensuring everyone was settled, meals were prepared, and routines were established. She mediated minor disagreements, answered questions, and made decisions without hesitation. These responsibilities were familiar, yet that night they felt heavier. Beneath her composed exterior, anticipation pulsed quietly. Every completed task brought her closer to the meeting she had imagined so many times. In brief moments of stillness, standing by a window, washing her hands, folding clothes, her thoughts returned to him. She pictured their first greeting, imagined the ease of their conversation, and hoped the warmth she felt from afar would remain unchanged. The contrast between her inner world and external duties created a delicate tension. She was grounded by responsibility, yet pulled by curiosity and hope. The journey from Abuja to Lagos had ended in distance, but another journey was just beginning, one that required balance between duty and desire. Christmas Eve loomed ahead, carrying promise and uncertainty in equal measure. Nkiru sensed that the coming night would test her composure, her trust, and her ability to navigate emotions she had so carefully managed until now. Whatever happened, she knew the experience would stay with her. The journey had already begun to change her, and the road ahead, unseen and unpredictable, was waiting. Left in charge, the moment Nkiru Okafor stepped fully into the house, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders with unmistakable force. The older relatives had already traveled for the holidays. Parents were occupied with work or errands, and without any formal announcement, she had become the eldest authority present. Every sibling, cousin, niece, and nephew instinctively turned toward her. Their expectations were silent but clear. She was the one in charge now. 23 young people filled the house, each with a different temperament, energy level, and need for attention. Some were loud and restless, running through the corridors with unrestrained excitement. Others were quieter, lingering close to her, seeking reassurance or guidance. The noise was constant, laughter, arguments, questions overlapping each other. The house felt alive, but also demanding. Nkiru moved from room to room with practiced composure, issuing instructions calmly, assigning chores, and breaking up disputes before they escalated. She reminded herself to stay patient, to speak gently, to lead by example. Meals had to be planned, snacks rationed, schedules loosely organized. Safety was always at the forefront of her mind. She counted heads frequently, making sure no one wandered off or got into trouble. Every question, "Where is this? Can I do that? What about later?" pulled at her attention. She rarely had a moment to herself. Even when she paused, someone called her name. The responsibility was exhausting, but familiar. She had carried similar burdens before, and she wore them with quiet strength. Still, The strain showed in subtle ways. Her shoulders ached. Her voice grew hoarse from constant instruction. She found herself taking deep breaths when no one was looking, grounding herself before responding again. Small disagreements required careful mediation, and minor accidents demanded swift reassurance. Every choice mattered, and every lapse could lead to disorder. Despite the fatigue, she reminded herself that responsibility was part of her identity. It was not something she resented, but something she believed in deeply. Being dependable had shaped her life, earned her trust, and defined her sense of self. Yet that belief did not erase the exhaustion. It only gave her the strength to endure it. As the day stretched on, her thoughts drifted more frequently toward the evening ahead. She had been planning to meet the man she had grown close to online, a meeting she had imagined countless times. The anticipation lingered quietly beneath the surface of her composure. Each glance at the clock reminded her that time was moving forward, whether she was ready or not. The contrast between her inner excitement and her external obligations created a constant tension. She wanted to prepare emotionally for the meeting, to feel light and present. Instead, she was anchored by duty. She knew she could not abandon her responsibilities, not even briefly, without careful planning. The safety and well-being of the children came first, as they always had. As evening approached, the pressure intensified. She began mentally rehearsing scenarios, weighing options, considering compromises. Could she step away briefly? Who could she trust to watch over the others? Every solution required careful thought. She understood that any decision she made would carry consequences, not only for her own happiness, but for those who depended on her. Christmas Eve was approaching, and with it, a test she had not anticipated. It was not just about meeting someone she cared for. It was about reconciling her personal desires with the responsibility that defined her. Nkiru sensed that the night ahead would challenge her patience, her judgment, and her understanding of balance in ways she had never faced before. She did not yet know how the evening would unfold, but she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever choices she made, they would reveal something essential about who she was and who she was becoming. The weight of responsibility. As the hours of the day passed, Nkiru Okafor became increasingly aware of the full weight of responsibility that came with being the eldest family member at home. It was not a role she had asked for, nor one that felt unfair or imposed, but it demanded constant attention and emotional discipline. 23 younger siblings, cousins, a niece, and a nephew filled the house with life and motion, each carrying their own needs, moods, and expectations. Their energy was boundless, and it required her steady presence to keep it from turning into disorder. From morning onward, Nkiru moved with purpose. She checked that chores were done properly, that meals were prepared on time, and that no one was left idle for too long. She assigned responsibilities carefully, knowing which child could be trusted with what task and who needed closer supervision. She mediated disputes over toys, space, and attention, speaking firmly but gently, encouraging compromise rather than punishment. Her voice became the constant thread holding the household together. Every detail mattered. She paid attention to small changes in tone, sudden silences, raised voices from another room. Experience had taught her that chaos rarely arrived loudly. It crept in through neglected details. A missed instruction, an unattended argument, or an unsupervised moment could quickly spiral. So she stayed alert, even when her body urged her to rest. The responsibility demanded foresight. She planned meals in advance, rationed snacks to avoid shortages, and scheduled activities to keep everyone occupied. She anticipated conflicts before they erupted and adjusted plans accordingly. This was not simply management, it was emotional labor. She had to consider personalities, moods, and unspoken tensions, maintaining balance in a house that never truly felt quiet. By midday, the fatigue settled in. Her legs ached from constant movement, and her mind felt crowded with lists and concerns. She found brief moments to sit, only to rise again when her name was called. Still, she did not complain. She had learned long ago that leadership often meant endurance, showing up consistently, even when tired. Despite the exhaustion, a quiet sense of pride took root within her. She saw the household functioning smoothly under her guidance. The children listened to her. They trusted her. That trust strengthened her resolve. Being in charge, she realized, was not about control or authority. It was about care, awareness, and accountability. It was about choosing patience when frustration would be easier and firmness when kindness alone was not enough. Yet even as she focused on the present, her thoughts occasionally wandered to the evening ahead. The anticipation of meeting the man she had grown close to online hovered at the edges of her consciousness. It was a soft distraction, a private excitement she carried quietly. She imagined them meeting again, the first exchange of smiles, the comfort she hoped to feel, the conversations that would flow naturally after months of distance. Each time her thoughts drifted, she pulled them back gently. There would be time for herself later, she reminded herself. Responsibility came first. The younger ones depended on her vigilance, and she would not allow personal anticipation to compromise their safety or comfort. Still, the contrast between her inner excitement and external obligations sharpened as the day wore on. By evening, Nkiru understood that this temporary role was more than a practical necessity. It was a test of her patience, her resilience, and her ability to balance care for others with care for herself. Every decision she made had ripple effects, influencing both the rhythm of the household and the feasibility of her plans. She sensed that the lessons of the day would not end with Christmas Eve. They would linger, shaping her understanding of responsibility in deeper ways. She did not yet know how the night would unfold, but she could feel that the true challenge was approaching, one that would confront her assumptions, disrupt her careful planning, and force her to redefine what responsibility truly meant when emotions, expectations, and human behavior collided. The Christmas Eve plan. Christmas Eve arrived with a quiet intensity that Nkiru Okafor could feel from the moment she woke up. The day carried a significance she had been holding in her thoughts for weeks. This was the night she would finally meet the man she had grown close to online, the one whose voice had become familiar and whose words had offered comfort from afar. The anticipation sat in her chest like a steady hum, equal parts excitement and unease. Yet even with her mind pulled toward the evening ahead, Nkiru did not lose sight of her responsibilities. The house was still full of life and movement. 23 younger siblings, cousins, a niece, and a nephew depended on her guidance, just as they had all day. Christmas Eve did not pause obligations. If anything, it heightened them. Emotions ran higher, energy levels rose, and small issues threatened to grow larger if left unchecked. She spent the day ensuring that everything ran smoothly. Meals were planned and served, chores were completed, and disagreements were settled with calm authority. She kept a mental checklist running constantly, making sure no detail was overlooked. Only when she felt confident that the household was stable did she allow herself to focus more fully on her personal plans. Nkiru had thought carefully about how to balance both worlds. Leaving the children behind was not an option. Trusting someone else with their care on such short notice felt irresponsible. After much consideration and discussion with the younger ones, she devised a solution that felt safest. They would all accompany her to the restaurant. It was not the ideal scenario for a first meeting, and she knew it was unconventional, but it ensured their safety and allowed her to honor both her duty and her commitment. As the evening approached, she prepared herself quietly. She dressed with care, choosing an outfit that reflected who she was, neither overly formal nor too casual. She wanted to feel comfortable, confident, and authentic. As she adjusted her appearance, she caught her reflection and paused, taking a deep breath. She rehearsed her greeting in her mind, imagining his smile, the sound of his voice without a phone between them. Questions surfaced, uninvited but persistent. Would he look the same as she imagined? Would the ease they shared online translate into real life? Would he understand her decision to bring her family along? Or would it create distance before the evening truly began? She pushed the doubts aside gently, reminding herself that she had acted with honesty and responsibility. The journey to the restaurant was lively. The younger family members buzzed with excitement, talking over one another, pointing out decorations along the road, and asking endless questions. Nkiru guided them patiently, maintaining order while answering what she could. Occasionally, she glanced at her phone, checking messages, confirming his arrival. Each glance made her heart beat a little faster. When they arrived, the restaurant welcomed them with warm lights, soft music, and the comforting aroma of food. Christmas decorations glowed subtly, adding to the festive atmosphere. Nkiru felt her nerves sharpen. She led the group inside. carefully arranging seating so the younger ones were comfortable and settled. She made sure everyone had what they needed before finally sitting down herself. In that moment of stillness, she became acutely aware of the significance of the night. This was not just a date or a meeting, it was a test of balance. Duty and desire stood side by side, neither willing to be ignored. She wondered how the evening would unfold, whether her careful planning would hold, or whether reality would disrupt the expectations she had so thoughtfully constructed. As she waited, the sounds of the restaurant faded into the background, her attention fixed on the entrance. When the door opened, her breath caught slightly. Her heart skipped, instinctively reacting before her mind could follow. The night had begun, and Nkiru sensed that nothing, neither her plans nor her assumptions, would unfold exactly as she had imagined. The unexpected guests. As Nkiru Okafor settled into the restaurant with her younger family members, a nervous excitement pulsed quietly beneath her composed exterior. She had arranged the seating with intention, placing the youngest where she could easily reach them, the older ones where they would be less restless. Every position had been considered. From her seat, she could see everyone clearly, 23 faces, each animated with curiosity and anticipation. It was the only way she felt comfortable proceeding with the evening. Her heart beat faster as she glanced toward the entrance. 2 months of conversations, shared laughter, and emotional closeness had led to this moment. She imagined the warmth of recognition, the ease of finally speaking without screens between them. At the same time, her awareness never strayed far from the responsibility before her. She listened for raised voices, watched for wandering feet, and intervened when excitement threatened to spill into disorder. Then he arrived. The shift in energy was immediate, though quiet. His steps slowed slightly as he took in the scene. The long table, the cluster of young faces, the noise, the movement. For a brief moment, his expression revealed surprise before he masked it with a polite smile. Kira noticed. Her chest tightened. She had known this situation was unconventional, but seeing his reaction made the reality sink in more sharply. She stood to greet him, her smile warm but measured. Introductions followed, one after another, far more than he had expected. As names blended together, the magnitude of the gathering became undeniable. He nodded, smiled, and responded courteously, yet his composure seemed strained. Nkiru reassured herself silently, reminding herself of the kindness and patience he had always shown. She believed he would understand once the initial shock passed. The younger relatives, unaware of the tension, continued chatting excitedly. Some asked questions about the menu. Others teased one another, laughter rising and falling unpredictably. Chairs shifted, voices overlapped. Nkiru gently corrected behavior, lowered voices, and reminded them to sit properly. She moved seamlessly between roles, caretaker, mediator, organizer, while trying not to let the strain show. She attempted to carve out moments of connection with him. Brief exchanges, soft smiles, short conversations between interruptions. She asked about his journey, commented on the decor, tried to anchor the evening in familiarity. Yet each time the conversation began to flow, another question pulled her away. A request for help, a disagreement to resolve, a child seeking reassurance. She noticed the subtle changes in his demeanor, the way his shoulders tensed slightly, the way his gaze drifted, scanning the table rather than settling comfortably. His responses grew shorter, his smile less relaxed. The restaurant staff moved efficiently, but the sheer size of the group made the space feel crowded and loud. Plates arrived, glasses clinked, and the background music struggled to compete with the energy at the table. Embarrassment crept in alongside anxiety. Nkiru felt torn between two truths. She had acted responsibly, and yet the situation was clearly overwhelming. She wondered if she should have explained more beforehand, prepared him better for what he would encounter. In her effort to manage everything, she realized she may have underestimated the emotional impact of the scene on someone stepping into it for the first time. Still, she did not allow herself to falter. She reminded herself that she had made the best decision she could under the circumstances. Leaving the children behind had never been an option. Her duty had guided her actions, not disregard for his feelings. She straightened her posture, steadied her breath, and continued to navigate the evening with quiet determination. Despite her efforts, the atmosphere remained strained. The connection they had nurtured online struggled to find space amid the noise and responsibility. Nkiru sensed that expectations, hers and his, were colliding with reality in ways neither had fully anticipated. This was not the intimate first meeting she had imagined, but something far more complex. As the evening unfolded, Nkiru understood that Christmas Eve was becoming a lesson about communication, preparation, and the limits of control. She could not manage every reaction or prevent discomfort. She could only remain true to herself, act with integrity, and respond with grace. The restaurant buzzed with conversation, movement, and unspoken tension. And as Nkiru looked around the table, balancing duty and desire once more, she prepared herself for whatever the night would reveal next, knowing that some lessons arrived not through planning, but through experience. Dinner began in a blur of movement, sound, and competing emotions. Plates clinked against tables, voices overlapped, and the restaurant hummed with the energy of Christmas Eve. Nkiru Okafor sat at the center of it all, acutely aware of the dual roles she was carrying. She was both caretaker and guest, guardian and woman on a first date. Balancing those identities required constant awareness. Every glance, every response, every decision mattered. She monitored the table closely as orders were taken. Some of the younger ones changed their minds at the last minute. Others asked questions about dishes they had never tried before. Nkiru stepped in gently, clarifying choices, encouraging simplicity, and ensuring that nothing was wasted. At the same time, she was conscious of her date beside her, aware that this was not the relaxed, intimate dinner either of them had likely imagined. The restaurant staff moved back and forth with practiced efficiency, but the size of the group made smooth service difficult. Orders took longer. Clarifications were needed. Plates arrived in stages rather than all at once. Nkiru felt a slow tightening in her chest as she realized how easily the evening could spiral into disorder if she lost focus even briefly. She glanced at her date often, gauging his reactions. At first, he remained polite, engaging when she spoke to him, smiling when spoken to. But as time passed, the strain became more visible. His posture stiffened slightly. His eyes drifted more frequently toward the noise at the table or toward the staff, as if searching for escape from the overwhelming scene. The patience she had admired during their conversations was being tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. Nkiru felt a quiet sting of disappointment, not at him, but at the situation. She had believed that practicality and responsibility would be enough to carry the evening through. She now understood that practicality did not always translate to comfort, especially for someone stepping into her world for the first time. Still, she reminded herself that she had acted out of necessity, not carelessness. She made several attempts to draw him into conversation, leaning in slightly, lowering her voice, asking about his journey, his plans for the holidays. For brief moments, the connection resurfaced, the ease, the familiarity, the shared understanding. But each time, an interruption pulled her away, a request for help, a disagreement between siblings, a child needing reassurance. Intimacy dissolved as quickly as it formed. When the meal neared its end, Nkiru felt a growing unease. The bill, she knew, would be substantial. She had assumed, perhaps too easily, that the arrangement was understood, that the evening had been planned with shared responsibility in mind. When the bill finally arrived, the reality of the cost settled heavily between them. Her date's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The patience he had maintained slipped, replaced by visible irritation. His movements became abrupt, his tone more restrained. Without discussion, he paid only for himself and Nkiru, leaving the remaining balance unaddressed. The moment hung in the air, quiet, awkward, undeniable. Nkiru felt a rush of embarrassment, followed quickly by resolve. This was not the time to falter. She excused herself briefly, stepped aside, and called her family to explain the situation. Her voice remained calm, measured, even as she coordinated payment for the rest of the meal. The younger relatives, absorbed in their food and conversation, remained largely unaware of the tension unfolding behind the scenes. When she returned to the table, she carried herself with the same composure she always did. She ensured everyone was settled, thanked the staff, and oversaw the final arrangements. Outwardly, she remained steady. Inwardly, she was processing the weight of what had just occurred. The dinner dilemma was more than a financial challenge. It was a confrontation with assumptions. She had assumed understanding. She had assumed patience. She had assumed that careful planning would account for every variable. The evening reminded her that human reactions were unpredictable, shaped by expectations that were not always spoken aloud. Despite the discomfort, Nkiru did not regret her choices. She had acted responsibly, guided by care and necessity. Yet she understood now that responsibility, while admirable, did not shield one from disappointment. It did not guarantee alignment or shared perspective. As the dinner concluded, Nkiru reflected quietly on the lessons unfolding before her. The night had not gone as planned, but it had revealed truths about communication, expectation, and the fine line between duty and personal desire. Whatever came next, she knew she would face it with the same steadiness that had guided her through the evening. The dilemma, though painful, had become a moment of clarity. And clarity, she knew, was often the beginning of growth. The aftermath and family blame. When the night finally settled and the restaurant lights were left behind, Nkiru Okafor returned home carrying more than just physical fatigue. The house welcomed her with familiar sounds, the shuffle of slippers, quiet laughter, murmured conversations, and the soft clatter of dishes being put away. To anyone observing from the outside, the evening appeared to have ended successfully. The younger siblings, cousins, niece, and nephew were fed, content, and winding down for the night. None of them seemed aware of the emotional weight that lingered heavily on Nkiru's shoulders. She moved slowly through the house, ensuring everyone was settled, checking doors, lights, and sleeping arrangements. Her body followed routine, but her mind replayed the events of the evening in fragments. The look on her date's face, the tension at the table, the sudden clarity that her assumptions had not aligned with reality. Even as she completed her duties, she felt the quiet ache of disappointment and self-questioning. Later, as she finalized payment arrangements with family members over the phone, her voice remained steady and composed. She explained the situation calmly, answering questions and coordinating transfers without complaint. Responsibility, she reminded herself, did not pause simply because a moment had been uncomfortable. Still, once the calls ended, the silence pressed in, giving space for reflection. It was then that the commentary began. Family members, now relaxed and comfortable, started to discuss the evening openly. Some laughed about the size of the group, others shook their heads in disbelief. A few spoke without malice but with blunt honesty. "Why did you take all of us?" one asked. "That was too much for a first meeting," another remarked. "Next time, you should have just gone alone." Nkiru listened quietly, allowing each voice to finish. She did not interrupt or raise her own voice. She understood that their reactions came from hindsight, from the ease of not having been responsible for everyone's safety or coordination. Still, hearing their judgments stung more than she expected. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm but firm. She explained her reasoning carefully, reminding them that she had been left in charge, that she could not leave so many young people unsupervised, and that her decision had been rooted in care, not recklessness. She emphasized that she had done what she believed was safest and most responsible under the circumstances. Some nodded in understanding. Others remained unconvinced, still struggling to see beyond the inconvenience of the evening. Nkiru accepted their reactions without argument. She knew that leadership often came with criticism, especially when outcomes were imperfect. As the house grew quieter and most of the younger ones drifted off to sleep, Nkiru finally allowed herself a moment alone. She sat in stillness, reflecting on the night with clearer eyes. She felt pride in how she had handled the logistics, the conflict, and the pressure. She had not panicked. She had not abandoned her responsibilities. She had shown restraint and maturity even when embarrassed and overwhelmed. Yet she also acknowledged the lessons the night had revealed. Good intentions, she realized, were not enough on their own. Assumptions, no matter how logical, could easily become sources of misunderstanding if left unspoken. Clear communication mattered, especially when expectations involved money, time, and emotional investment. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her date. She remembered his earlier kindness, the patience he had shown before the evening unraveled, and the way circumstances had tested both of them. She did not excuse the discomfort, but she understood it. The night had asked more of both of them than either had prepared for. By the time she stood to rest, Nkiru felt a quiet sense of growth settling within her. The evening had not been easy, but it had been revealing. It taught her that responsibility was complex, that leadership often required sacrifice, and that doing the right thing did not always lead to immediate understanding or appreciation. This aftermath, marked by family opinions, personal reflection, and emotional clarity, became a turning point. It reminded Nkiru that growth often came wrapped in discomfort, and that wisdom was shaped not by perfect outcomes, but by how one navigated imperfect moments. As the house finally fell into silence, Nkiru closed her eyes knowing that this chapter, though heavy, had strengthened her. Whatever came next, she would carry its lessons forward, with patience, humility, and a deeper understanding of herself. Lessons and expectations. In the quiet hours after Christmas Eve, when the house had finally settled and the night stretched long and still, Nkiru Okafor lay awake with her thoughts. The laughter, tension, and hurried decisions of the evening replayed in her mind, not as sharp memories anymore, but as lessons slowly arranging themselves into clarity. The night had not unfolded the way she imagined, yet it had offered something equally valuable: understanding. The first and most immediate lesson centered on communication. Nkiru realized that assumptions, even reasonable ones, were fragile foundations. She had assumed that her date would intuitively understand why she brought her younger siblings, cousins, niece, and nephew along. From her perspective, the reasoning was obvious. She was the eldest present, responsible for their safety and supervision. Yet she now saw how silence had created a gap between intention and perception. Without prior explanation, her actions had come as a shock rather than a thoughtful decision. She understood that clarity could have softened the evening, perhaps even changed its course. Going forward, she resolved to speak her intentions plainly, no matter how obvious they seemed to her. Another lesson followed closely behind: the management of expectations. Nkiru had imagined a carefully balanced evening, family responsibilities neatly contained, personal connection unfolding naturally, and joy threading through it all. Reality, however, resisted such neat arrangements. The night reminded her that life rarely adhered to mental rehearsals. Expectations, she realized, needed room to bend. Holding them too tightly only amplified disappointment. Flexibility was not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. She also reflected on emotional patience. Throughout the evening, she had encountered a range of reactions: surprise, frustration, misunderstanding, and quiet judgment. Not everyone responded with the empathy or composure she might have hoped for. Yet she had remained steady. She had not raised her voice, abandoned her responsibilities, or allowed embarrassment to override her values. This recognition brought her a quiet sense of pride. Patience, she realized, was not passive endurance but active self-control. Another important realization emerged around responsibility itself. Being dependable had always been central to Nkiru's identity, but that night forced her to see its complexity. Responsibility often meant sacrifice of comfort, ease, and sometimes even personal happiness. It meant making decisions that might not be appreciated in the moment, yet it also affirmed her character. She had protected those entrusted to her care, even when it made things harder for herself. That, she knew, mattered. She also reflected on relationships. Online connections, no matter how deep, existed within limited contexts. Real life introduced unpredictability, finances, family dynamics, unspoken expectations. The night had shown her how quickly perceptions could shift when virtual understanding met physical reality. It was not a condemnation of connection, but a reminder that relationships required adaptability, honesty, and shared understanding to survive beyond screens. As the night wore on, Nkiru felt something settle within her, a quiet maturity shaped by experience rather than theory. The evening had not been a failure, as some might frame it. It had been a mirror, revealing her strengths, her blind spots, and the areas where growth was still needed. When she finally closed her eyes, she felt no bitterness, only resolve. The Christmas Eve date had become more than an awkward first meeting. It had been a lesson in expectations, how they are formed, how they falter, and how they can be reshaped with humility and insight. Nkiru Okafor understood that life would continue to test her judgment, her patience, and her values. But she also knew this: she would face those tests with greater awareness, clearer communication, and a deeper trust in her ability to learn, adapt, and lead with grace. Reflecting on family and love. Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Nkiru Okafor sat alone by the window of her room, the soft glow of Legos stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Streetlights blinked steadily, car headlights traced slow movements along distant roads, and the city hummed with a life that never fully slept. The stillness inside the room contrasted sharply with the emotional noise of the evening she had just lived through. Her body was tired, but her mind was awake. She thought first about her family. The faces of her younger siblings, cousins, niece, and nephew passed through her thoughts one by one. Their laughter, their excitement, their dependence on her presence. Throughout the evening, they had looked to her instinctively, trusting her to guide them, protect them, and make decisions on their behalf. That trust was not accidental. It had been built over years of consistency and care. The responsibility she carried was heavy, yes, but it was also meaningful. She realized that responsibility, when carried with love, became an expression of devotion rather than sacrifice. Nkiru acknowledged how easily things could have gone wrong. A moment of inattention, a careless decision, or frustration allowed to rise could have changed the night entirely. Yet she had remained composed. She had chosen patience over irritation, structure over chaos. That realization brought her a quiet sense of pride, not arrogance, but affirmation. She had risen to the occasion, imperfectly perhaps, but sincerely. Her thoughts then drifted toward the man she had finally met in person. For weeks, their connection had lived in words, voices, and shared vulnerability across distance. In that space, understanding had flowed easily. In reality, however, complexity had entered quickly. The weight of expectations, unspoken assumptions, and the unpredictability of the moment had reshaped the experience. And yet, she did not regret meeting him. The encounter had stripped away illusion and replaced it with clarity. She understood now that affection alone was not enough. Love required space for reality, for discomfort, for moments that did not go as planned. It required empathy on both sides, the ability to pause, to listen, and to adjust. The night had not diminished her feelings. Instead, it had refined them, grounding them in truth rather than imagination. Nkiru also reflected on human behavior more broadly. She had seen how easily even well-meaning people could become overwhelmed, how patience could thin under pressure, how silence could create misunderstanding where explanation could have created connection. These were not failures of character, she realized, but reminders of human limits. Despite the stress and awkward moments, Nkiru felt an unexpected sense of peace. She had not abandoned her family for romance, nor had she denied herself the chance to explore love. She had stood at the intersection of both and done her best. The evening had been messy, emotional, and imperfect, but it had been honest. She began to understand that family and love were not competing forces in her life. They were intertwined reflections of the same values: care, responsibility, patience, and commitment. The way she protected her family mirrored the way she approached relationships, with thoughtfulness, caution, and sincerity. One did not diminish the other. Instead, each revealed different dimensions of who she was becoming. As she prepared for sleep, Nkiru felt grounded. The night had not broken her confidence. It had strengthened it. She carried forward gratitude for her family, clarity about her expectations in love, and a deeper trust in her own judgment. Christmas Eve had not delivered perfection, but it had given her insight, and that, she knew, was a gift far more enduring. Facing the consequences. The morning after Christmas Eve arrived quietly, almost gently, as if offering Nkiru Okafor a moment to breathe. The house, once alive with laughter and noise, moved at a slower pace. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the signs of the previous night. Dishes yet to be fully cleared, shoes scattered near the door, and tired faces emerging one by one. The excitement had faded, replaced by the calm realism that followed every emotionally charged experience. For Nkiru, relief mingled with reflection. The tension of the dinner, the financial stress, and the emotional weight of the night had not disappeared, but they no longer felt overwhelming. Instead, they demanded to be faced honestly and responsibly. She gathered the younger siblings, cousins, niece, and nephew together, choosing her words carefully. Her tone was gentle but firm, the same steady voice they had learned to respect. She explained that the night had been enjoyable, but it had also revealed the consequences of choices, both planned and unplanned. She spoke about respect for others, cooperation, and understanding that excitement did not erase responsibility. Her message was not one of punishment, but of awareness. Some listened quietly, others nodded, and a few asked questions. Kiru welcomed them all. She wanted the lesson to be shared, not imposed. In that moment, she understood that leadership was not about control, but about guidance, helping others understand the reasoning behind decisions rather than simply enforcing them. Her thoughts then returned to the financial aftermath. The cost of the dinner had weighed heavily on her the previous night, but in the light of day, it became a practical matter to resolve. She contacted family members again, clearly explaining what had happened and what was needed to settle the remaining balance. Though the process required humility and transparency, it also reinforced the importance of accountability. She did not deflect blame or minimize the situation. She addressed it directly. The younger relatives watched her handle the situation calmly and responsibly. Without intending to, Nkiru taught them another lesson: how to face challenges without panic or avoidance. She realized that her actions carried more influence than her words ever could. Her thoughts inevitably returned to her date. She acknowledged his discomfort and frustration, recognizing that the evening had not unfolded in a way he could have anticipated. From his perspective, the situation was overwhelming, and she allowed herself to empathize with that reality. At the same time, she affirmed her own choices. She had prioritized safety, responsibility, and duty, values that defined who she was. The challenge lay not in choosing between the two, but in learning how to communicate expectations more clearly in the future. Throughout the day, Nkiru navigated her own emotions with honesty. There was embarrassment, yes, but also resilience. There was disappointment, but also insight. She did not allow guilt to consume her, nor did she dismiss her feelings entirely. Instead, she treated them as signals, indicators of growth rather than failure. By evening, clarity had replaced confusion. Nkiru understood that facing consequences was not about punishment, but about learning. Every decision carried weight, and maturity meant accepting that weight with grace. Responsibility extended beyond making choices. It included owning their outcomes. As the day closed, Nkiru felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The events of Christmas Eve had tested her patience, judgment, and emotional intelligence, but she had emerged stronger and more self-aware. She carried forward not regret, but understanding. Facing the consequences had not diminished her confidence. It had refined it, balancing relationships and duties. In the days following Christmas Eve, Nkiru Okafor found herself living more deliberately than usual. The intensity of the holiday had faded, but its lessons lingered in subtle, persistent ways. Each day presented small decisions that reminded her of the delicate balance she was learning to maintain between family and personal desire, obligation and choice. Her younger siblings, cousins, niece, and nephew continued to rely on her presence. From morning routines to evening check-ins, Nkiru remained attentive. She organized meals with foresight, ensured schoolwork and chores were completed, and stepped in calmly when disagreements arose. Her leadership was quiet but effective. She did not need to raise her voice. Her consistency had earned their respect. Yet beneath her composed exterior, she was learning to recognize her own limits. She realized that responsibility, when carried alone for too long, could become heavy. In moments of quiet, she allowed herself to rest, reflect, and recharge. She understood that caring for others required caring for herself as well. This awareness marked a subtle shift in her thinking. Responsibility did not mean self-erasure. Balance required preservation of one's own emotional strength. Alongside her family duties, her relationship continued to develop. The man she had met online remained present, not just in memory, but in ongoing communication. Their conversations, once light and effortless, now carried greater honesty. The events of Christmas Eve had opened space for deeper discussion about expectations, boundaries, and understanding one another beyond idealized versions. Kira chose openness. She explained her role within her family, the values that guided her decisions, and the weight of responsibility she carried without resentment. She spoke not defensively, but thoughtfully. In doing so, she allowed him to see her more fully, not just as a romantic interest, but as a woman shaped by duty, care, and lived experience. Gradually, understanding grew. He began to see that her actions were not driven by disregard for him, but by deeply rooted principles. This realization shifted the dynamic between them. Respect replaced confusion, and empathy softened previous frustration. The connection they shared became steadier, grounded not in fantasy, but in reality. Balancing both worlds became an intentional practice. Kiru learned to create space, short moments of conversation, late-night calls once the house was quiet, pauses in the day where she allowed herself to focus on her own thoughts. These moments mattered. They reminded her that personal connection did not have to come at the expense of responsibility. She also became more mindful of boundaries. Not every problem needed her immediate attention. Not every situation required her intervention. Trusting others to share responsibility allowed her to breathe more freely. This realization was liberating. Balance, she discovered, was not achieved through control, but through trust and communication. Through this period, Nkiru grew quietly stronger. The complexity of managing family life and personal relationships no longer felt overwhelming. It felt navigable. She understood that both required patience, empathy, and intentional effort. Neither was simple, but both were worth nurturing. By the end of those days, Nkiru felt grounded and empowered. She had not chosen one path over another. Instead, she had learned to walk both with clarity and grace. The lessons of Christmas Eve continued to shape her, guiding her toward a future where responsibility and love could coexist, not in conflict, but in balance. Lessons for the future. As the holiday season gradually drew to a close, Nkiru Okafor found herself moving through her days with a new sense of awareness. The rush of Christmas celebrations had softened into routine, but the experiences of Christmas Eve remained vivid in her thoughts. What had initially felt like a difficult, emotionally demanding night had transformed into a powerful source of learning, one that would influence her choices long after the decorations were put away. Nkiru understood now that responsibility was not simply about doing what needed to be done. It was about foresight, communication, and emotional intelligence. One of the clearest lessons she carried forward was the importance of open and honest communication. She recognized how easily assumptions could distort intentions. What made sense in her mind did not always translate clearly to others. Going forward, she resolved to articulate her plans, expectations, and limitations openly, whether with family members, friends, or romantic partners. Clarity, she realized, was an act of respect. Patience was another lesson that stood out. The intensity of managing a large household while navigating personal anticipation had tested her composure in unexpected ways. Yet she had discovered that patience was not passive endurance. It was an active choice to remain grounded, thoughtful, and steady under pressure. When she stayed calm, she was able to guide others more effectively and protect her own emotional well-being. This insight reaffirmed her belief in patience as a strength rather than a weakness. Adaptability also emerged as a defining takeaway. Despite careful planning, the evening had unfolded in ways she could not have predicted. Instead of resisting the unexpected, she had learned the value of adjusting with intention. Flexibility, she realized, did not mean abandoning principles. It meant applying them creatively in changing circumstances. This understanding gave her confidence that she could handle uncertainty without losing herself in the process. Perhaps the most profound lesson involved the relationship between duty and personal desire. For much of her life, Nkiru had approached responsibility as something that required personal restraint. Christmas Eve showed her that this did not have to be the case. She learned that caring for others and nurturing personal relationships were not opposing forces. When approached thoughtfully, they could coexist and even strengthen one another. Responsibility, when guided by self-awareness, could deepen connection rather than limit it. As she reflected, Nkiru felt a quiet empowerment. The challenges she had faced had not diminished her. They had clarified her values. She felt better equipped to navigate family expectations, romantic relationships, and her own aspirations with balance and confidence. The lessons she gained were not dramatic revelations, but steady truths, ones that would guide her decisions in subtle but meaningful ways. Christmas Eve became a reference point, not as a moment of discomfort, but as a turning point. It reminded her that growth often arrived through complexity, and that wisdom was built through experience rather than perfection. With renewed purpose, Nkiru stepped into the future prepared, not just to manage responsibility, but to do so with empathy, clarity, and intention. The holiday season had given her more than memories. It had given her direction. Looking ahead, as the Christmas season slowly faded into memory, Nkiru Okafor found herself moving through her days with a heightened sense of awareness. The decorations came down, routines returned, and life resumed its familiar rhythm. Yet something within her had shifted. The experiences of Christmas Eve, once emotionally charged and overwhelming, had settled into meaningful perspective. They no longer felt like a disruption, but like a turning point. She often paused to observe her surroundings at home. The younger siblings, cousins, niece, and nephew filled the house with laughter, movement, and endless conversation. Their presence reminded her why she had acted the way she did that night. They were not just responsibilities. They were relationships built on trust. Knowing that they felt safe under her care brought her quiet satisfaction. The experience had reaffirmed her ability to lead with patience, structure, and compassion, even when circumstances were far from ideal. At the same time, Nkiru acknowledged how much the responsibility had tested her. Being the eldest present had required constant vigilance, emotional control, and thoughtful decision-making. Yet she did not feel diminished by the effort. Instead, she felt strengthened. The experience had shown her that she could handle complexity without losing her sense of self. That realization stayed with her as she looked toward the future. Her thoughts often turned to the man she had met online. The anticipation that once filled her with nervous excitement had been replaced by something steadier, clarity. Their first meeting had revealed the difference between expectation and reality, but it had also revealed something more important: the need for honest communication and mutual understanding. Nkiru approached the connection with renewed intention, no longer driven by idealized visions, but by grounded awareness. She felt hopeful, not because everything was perfect, but because she was better prepared to navigate imperfection. Looking ahead, Nkiru understood that life would continue to present situations that demanded balance. There would always be competing priorities, family obligations, personal aspirations, emotional connections. What had changed was her confidence in managing them. She knew now that balance was not achieved through perfection, but through thoughtful choices, clear communication, and empathy. She also recognized that growth was ongoing. The lessons of Christmas Eve were not conclusions, but foundations. They would guide her as she stepped into new experiences, made new decisions, and formed deeper relationships. Each challenge would refine her judgment, just as this one had. As the new year approached, Nkiru felt grounded and hopeful. She carried forward gratitude for her family, respect for her responsibilities, and a clearer understanding of what she needed from love and partnership. She no longer feared complexity. She accepted it as part of life's design. The Christmas Eve date had ended, but its impact remained. It had shaped her outlook, strengthened her resolve, and expanded her emotional awareness. With a calm heart and steady confidence, Nkiru Okafor looked ahead, ready to move forward with grace, wisdom, and a deeper trust in herself and the path unfolding before her. Thanks for watching. Kindly like, share with friends, and subscribe for more amazing stories.